Let's discuss developments now with political scientist, activist, and retired U.S. military official Scott Bennett. Scott, thanks for your time today. Indeed, as a former military officer, how difficult is it to stop attacks like this? Can the public ever, I suppose, be kept 100% safe?
Well, I worked in psychological warfare at the State Department and high levels, and I can say this is a pivot moment. This is a change in the direction and the nature of the conflict, largely because everyone with a brain recognizes Ukraine has lost this conflict and Russia is victorious, as we've seen in Bakhmut and elsewhere. So this is an elevation of the asymmetrical terrorism campaign that the United States and Britain has been orchestrating, from the attack against Daria Dugina to the Crimean bridge to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Generally, there are three objectives in these sort of terrorist attacks. Number one, they are targeting the journalists to silence their telling of truth. And what the truth has been is that Ukraine has become a puppet of the United States, has had biochemical labs on its territory, has been weaponizing attacks against Russia as part of a broader NATO expansionary agenda. That's the first truth that must be silenced by these assassination operations. Number two is they're trying to cower the civilian population in St. Petersburg, in Russia, from going out and living in terror, and translating that into protests against President Putin. Again, regime change has been part of the psychological warfare tactics by the West. And three, they're trying to provoke Russia into a countermeasure in the hopes that Russia would take a similar action against cafes in the United States or Britain, because that would galvanize the Western societies into a World War II position, which is what they want. They want to go to war because of the dismal disintegration that has been occurring throughout all of the European governments, and especially the Biden administration. So it's an important time to not be provoked into countermeasures, and to recognize this is most likely a three-person operation team with two men, one woman, and these sort of attacks may continue, but I think in the long run, Russia is victorious, and they should always know that there are Americans and Europeans that do not side with their government's agenda of genocide, but we in fact stand with the Russian people and the Russian culture, and we recognize that their fight has been truthful and has been heroic. And I hope the Russians recognize that there are Westerners that are firmly opposed to this terrible genocide that the West has been initiating since 2014.
Scott, as this is a high-profile journalist, a war vlogger, who's been reporting on the conflict for some time, are you surprised someone could bring in a bomb hidden in a statuette and just hand it straight to him?
Well, that's why women are used as instruments in these sort of delivery operations, because they're not tested, they're not questioned, they're not harassed, they're not exposed to the brutal countermeasures that would be employed against men. So this is an attack that most likely the U.S. CIA and the British MI6 were using and coordinating and planning for a long time with the Ukrainian participation. They're the puppets in this. But I would not be surprised either if they target American journalists such as Scott Ritter, Senator Black, myself, Colonel Doug McGregor, others who have been speaking out in the hopes that they could make a false flag and blame that on Russia or something similar. We're dealing in a time, unlike any other time in history, where the West has lost all credibility for honor or truthfulness or dignity or human rights or any of these platitudes that they pompously produce and put up in the sky about democracy and freedom. All of that is hypocrisy, and this attack demonstrates that.
We've seen the aftermath, Scott, of the explosion. What kind of device could have caused such damage?
This was a tremendously powerful packed statue with C4, I would imagine, to obliterate everything inside. And sadly, you'll have a lot more people die in the next 24 hours, with others with permanent eye and ear injury. And I wouldn't be surprised if they replicate this attack for special effects purposes throughout other cities in Russia and beyond, for the purposes of terrorizing. But this is a moment where the Russian people need to recognize this is an act of terror and desperation by the West, because victorious are the people of Russia in their liberation of the Eastern European Russian people that were subjected to such horrific genocide since 2014. So it's because they're victorious that this act of desperation and terrorist attack has happened. But it will only quicken the assembly of a multipolar world. It will only side more nations to the Russian side and to the Russian people, and it will only further isolate the United States and Britain, and hopefully tear from their alliance these independent European countries that will say, this is a bridge too far, this is an attack that is completely inhuman, and just like the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, we know who did it. It was the United States, Britain, and some other criminal syndicate elements.
Scott, many thanks for your time today. Scott Bennett, former U.S. military officer on RT. Well, one of the